Hello, everyone. In this podcast, we will be discussing sensitive topics such as sexual assault. It's important to take care of yourself while listening. Some suggestions are listening while you're in a healthy headspace or knowing who you can reach out to if you become upset. Our 24/7 helpline for crisis calls based out of Central Florida is 407-500-HEAL. By contacting the National Hotline at 1-800-656-4673, you can get support and learn about your local resources. There's always someone ready to help. Victim Service Center podcast. Here we sit down with professionals that serve survivors and victims of trauma or those who've experienced violence and have conversations about social issues. This week, we are talking about movement and mental health. My name is Emily Mitchell. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the education coordinator at the Victim Service Center of Central Florida. With me today, I have Ella Shepard. Ella uses she, her pronouns and is a licensed mental health counselor and founder of Endeavors Counseling and Community Yoga and Dance, a virtual space for movement. Ella loves working with youth and teens and uses movement and breath to assist herself and clients through big emotions and stress. So Ella, thank you so much for being here today. And I also have returning Jordan Steckler. Jordan uses she, her pronouns and is a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida. She earned her master's in clinical mental health counseling from the University of Central Florida. Jordan currently works with adolescents and adults on a variety of concerns, including depression, anxiety, stress, trauma, and grief. Jordan is also a 200-hour certified yoga teacher. So Jordan, thank you as well for coming back onto the podcast. We're excited to have you.
Thanks for having me.
As a very brief introduction, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and in honor of uplifting conversations on this topic, normalizing mental health, and providing tools that can be helpful and healing for those listening, today we will be talking about movement and the wellness wheel, yoga, misconceptions surrounding mental health, and ways movement can be beneficial to our overall holistic health. So with that, and anyone can jump in at any time, how would you define movement?
So I like to, before I teach a yoga class, usually like to beginners, I like to ask people in the space, like, who has never done movement before? And usually lots of hands go up. But then I sort of redefine it and I'll say, are you breathing? Are you thinking? Are you moving right now? And then all their hands go down. And I'm like, well, you're doing yoga. Congratulations. So I think I'd sort of like to deconstruct movement in the same way and say that if you're breathing, if you're alive, you're moving. So really, I think the difference between your automatic movements in your body, your heart is beating, your lungs are expanding and contracting as you breathe, blood is circulating in your body, the difference is linking your brain to those automatic functions and deciding, okay, I'm going to put my right foot here. I'm going to reach my arms up and I'm going to breathe in when I do that. So it's sort of like threading together movement with what's already happening internally with your body moving.
I love that definition. And I love the concept of kind of redefining what movement really is. It sounds like we're always moving. Were you kind of describing like moving with intention almost?
Definitely. Yeah. So it's, we move throughout our whole day. We drive places, we walk places, we eat things, and we're always moving, but it's sometimes can be mindless. So I think when we're paying attention is really what I would say like makes that shift of like, oh, we're just doing things versus like we're engaging in movement. So yeah, it would be a shift of intention or just attention.
Yeah. And I think taking out that there, it has to be goal oriented. Like movement can just be for joy, for expression. And maybe the expression is like, I'm angry and frustrated, so I'm going to do some kind of movement just to work through the feeling. Or I'm really excited, I'm going to dance it out, something like that. It doesn't have to be for a goal, for a number, or anything like that.
I love that too. And I know that you kind of already went over some examples, and I know we'll be diving into a little bit more of yoga as well. But I don't know if there are any other kind of small examples of movement that you wanted to kind of highlight.
I think Ella kind of started it with talking about breath. Like breath is movement, especially when you're adding the intentionality of I'm going to expand my lungs really big, or I'm going to breathe through my belly and like my low lungs and then through my chest, or I'm going to do really quick breathing like through my nose. Adding that intention, like that's movement right there.
Got it. Yeah, I love that concept of being able to control your breath in ways of location too, and kind of like focusing on that too. That's really fascinating, and I know we'll talk more about like the empowerment of it as well. But I wanted to also ask, because I actually have never heard of this until we had our conversation before, um, to plan this podcast. But what is the wellness wheel, and how does it relate to holistic wellness?
So the wellness wheel is it's a circle, and it's cut up into different like pies. So imagine like a pizza. And I think the acronym that helps me remember is POSIES, POSIES. So physical, occupational, and I like to tie in financial to occupational too, or like educational might be your occupation. You might be a student. POS, so social, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual.
I was going to say that's so clever with the acronym, because I sometimes can't remember these specific ones. And I've also seen different types of wellness wheels. They weave in different things. So Ella, I'm glad when you were talking about occupational, you wove in, it could be your occupation could be a student. That's totally a job. And then the financial piece, that's absolutely tied into that as well.
When I work with youth and teens too, I tie in, they're a student, but they're also a member of their household, and their occupation may be expectations around contributing with chores or whatever. So the wellness wheel is just a one way to view holistic well-being.
Totally. It's a lens to kind of to like analyze and look at like how we're doing. So to kind of add on to that, like what I might bring that up to a client and like show the whole pie, and then have them color in how much are you focusing or working on this part of the pie right now, or how much is this naturally showing up in your life. So then that's like a way to look at how they're doing. So maybe movement, maybe physical health is suffering. They're not adding intentional movement, so their mood is really low. Like that's really where I would focus on. Like if your mood's really low, let's add in some kind of movement to boost those happy hormones, that kind of thing.
It sounds like that this wheel can be used as far as trying to balance things in our lives, maybe, and our needs, maybe. Do you find that we always have to kind of come back to this wellness wheel, that there's kind of this ebb and flow that happens naturally within our lives, do you think?
Absolutely. I was introduced to the wellness wheel in grad school. And in grad school, we were tasked with like almost every semester, I think we had a paper to write on, all right, what are your self-care goals? And I remember like torturing myself with my self-care goals. Like it was awful because I just felt like I had to overachieve, or I had to like have every single one 100%. And so I was like miserable, and then feeling really bad about myself because like I didn't really want to read books for pleasure, but I thought for my intellectual growth, I had to. So I was like, I will read 4 books a semester outside of my academic reading. And then I was like, why am I torturing myself? This is so unnecessary. So I think similarly to how movement can be a thing that we use to like make ourselves feel inadequate, or like we like create some artificial idea or standard that like comes from probably society's poor messages about well-being, but then we use it to like torture ourselves or feel bad. And so I always like to encourage that, like, yeah, you're not going to be doing all of those things all the time 100%. You're going to be doing, and it's not something to judge. It's just for awareness and for like gentle reminders of like, wow, I'm really and it's also different for everybody, right? So an introverted person is not going to engage the same way with the social piece of the pie as someone who's extroverted. Like I'm pretty extroverted, and when I need social, it's usually that I need less socializing rather than more, because my norm is lots of socializing. So when I'm imbalanced in the social piece of the pie, I need a little bit of alone time.
I totally relate to that overachieving kind of where you're like, this will make me have better holistic health by giving myself homework that I can't do.
Yeah.
I totally relate to that. Jordan, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think on a similar like vein, or when I heard it, Ella, when you said judgment, I was thinking about shoulds, and especially with your example of the books, like, oh, I should read like 4 books a semester, like that'll look really or feel really great or something, and how we can't put all of our energy into each part of the pie equally. Maybe you need to choose, this is one piece I'm going to focus on today or this week or something like that.
And I wanted to ask if whenever you share this wheel, do you find with your clients, do you find that they're like overwhelmed with it? Like, how do they react and respond usually when they see, and everyone's different, of course, but when they see this wheel, because I'm just thinking now kind of like, it can be kind of overwhelming to be like, okay, these are all, things to keep in mind.
I usually start with, what are you already doing? Because a lot of times people don't acknowledge what they're already doing. And if I had been a smart grad student, an efficient grad student, I would have just put what I was already doing, but instead I added more. And like, I do think because of our culture in the United States and Western culture, we are kind of geared towards that, like competitive or high achieving is sort of the thing that we do. And so to say like, what have you already got going on that's working for you here? And then to start with the strengths and acknowledging, wow, you're already doing so much with your occupational wellness. So maybe you don't need to add anything there. That realm is kind of well cared for. Or maybe you need to do less there, because sometimes that might be the thing, is to like scale back, do less.
Yeah, I think what I was also hearing is like what you're doing right now might be enough, kind of tying into Ella, what you were saying about, oh, you need to do more, more, more. But look at your strengths, what you're good at, what's good right now, and you don't have to add on. And maybe that's fine. And you can just keep going from there. And then you can put your energy on something where there might be a lack that you need to bolster up to help yourself feel more balanced.
That makes so much sense. And I think that is everyone's struggle. I think everyone can kind of relate to this, like needing a balancing, but also I really appreciate you all uplifting strengths and celebrating what we already are achieving to our wellness and our health. With that, I also think it might be helpful before we move forward in the conversation is to define mental health. So how would you define mental health?
Jordan, you are having a reaction, so I'm very curious as to what you think.
Oh, it's just, I laugh sometimes because I use all these words that intuitively I really understand. And like, this is my job, mental health. And then I'm like, how do I break this down? How do I break down mental health? Like we even have the wellness wheel, right? Like there are so many different aspects, and like emotional is one section, social is another. And we break it down and yet they're all tied together. So like mental health is mood, is emotion, is how we move throughout our day, how we experience ourselves and our lives. It fluctuates. It's not something that's like a constantly stable or constant. it's a shifting thing. It kind of like what we were talking about before of intentionally like paying attention to, do I need to add more here or take away here?
Definitely. I think it is perplexing to define something that's so pervasive and like, how do you put your finger on it? It is challenging, but I think that it can be a measurement tool. Like it can be a way for each person to kind of define, to really truly answer the question, like, how are you doing? We pass each other in the hallway at work and in school and, you know, in the coffee line or whatever. And people constantly greet each other with this question, how are you doing? How are you doing? You know, I think we did it on the beginning of this call. And so often we're not actually giving space for the answer. But I think what mental health might mean to me is like actual space for the true, real, complicated, sticky, messy answer.
I so resonate with that. I had a one-on-one meeting with my supervisor and we started kind of like Ella. So we started the call with, how are you doing? And I said, I'm okay. And then she was like, how are you really doing? And I was like, oh my God, you actually want to know how I'm doing. Like you really want to know the actual answer. And like Ella said, like a lot of people just stick to the surface and like, that's fine. Or I'll ask them how they're doing and they might not ask me back how I'm doing. And that can be telling. So I definitely agree.
I totally see where you're coming from with that too. And I can, that resonates with me as well. I like to also say, because I think that there's this misconception that we only talk about mental health if it's, when we go into the realm of psychology and therapy and things like that. It's
like illness.
Yeah, like illness. And it's like everyone actually has mental health, just like we all have physical health, right? Like,
yes. I'm so glad you said that. I was trying to remind myself to say that. I'm so glad that you said that. Yes, everyone has mental health and everyone's mental health is at a different level and it can vary minute to minute, day to day.
Yeah, it's very fluid. So I always like to bring that up. And speaking of movement and fluidity, so what is actually the relationship between movement and mental health? Can it help us process emotions? You mentioned, Jordan, that it can change mood, things like that.
Yeah. So the relationship between movement and mental health, I feel like, those graphs in school when they were showing like, oh, if it's an inverse, it goes one direction, or if it's like direct, it goes like, it's like an upward direction. Like if you add it, or at least maybe I'm speaking for myself too. Like when I add in more movement, I'm typically feeling better, especially it's movement that I enjoy, not movement I think like I'm supposed to do or should do. If I'm thinking I really need to dance for 10 minutes, I think that's just calling to me and I do it and I feel so much better. And a part of it is like the boosting like the hormones, like the endorphins. And the other thing is what I said before of working through an emotion and like working through the cycle of that emotion. Movement can help to just move through it and process through it instead of having it getting stuck and festering in your body.
I actually have a like small client story, if that is appropriate to share. Yeah. So I worked with an elementary schooler and they were suffering with like confidence issues and low self-esteem. And so I encouraged the student to stand in extended mountain pose, which is just like your feet underneath your hips, your hands reaching up and kind of like a big funnel shape. And I was like, let's take 10 big, powerful breaths here. And then I was also sort of teaching this client about power poses. And I was like, all right, next we're going to stand like a superhero. Like you are a super person. So like express that however you want with your stance, with your body. And then after like doing that for a minute or not even a minute, however long, 10 breaths probably takes a minute if you're going slow. This client started like dancing and like singing a little song. I think it was the Justin, "'Cause I'm Happy." And I was like, wow. So I observed, it was really cool. Like I've experienced it in my own life too. Like when I move, I feel better, but it was really an awesome moment with the client to see a shift in their experience of themselves and their feeling of confidence was like just like evident that they broke out into a dance and song. And so, and again, like it doesn't have to be movement, right? Like we were doing static positions, like they were holding a posture, and that made a shift. And just breathing, right? Being intentional, breathing, being still or moving.
Thank you for sharing that story. It's so powerful. And I think it does such an incredible job of showing how it can shift moods, kind of the power of movement. And I love that, again, it's important that we go back to kind of the beginning of like redefining what movement can be. It's not just like, okay, get on the treadmill and you'll feel better, which it might be for some people, but there's so many other individual things that people can do. And I know that we were talking about mood, but I'd like to kind of dig in a little bit more into kind of, does it protect us against things like depression or other mental illnesses?
Yeah. So I think it can depend, because especially with depression, that can be such a complex, I don't like saying disease, like such a complex situation and state of mental health. I think it can help to create a shift. Like maybe it can help to make it less severe or help to boost mood. And it depends, especially with depression, it depends on how severe it is. Certain forms of depression, it really requires so many things. Because I think with low levels of depression, movement can be a great way to work with, counteract, or improve mood. But with severe forms of depression, it may not be enough, and other things are really important to create a shift.
Yeah, I was wanting to say that it's a positive contribution, but I don't think it's that simple, because I do think that it can be problematic too, especially thinking about like eating disorders or body dysmorphia, that movement, it can be problematic. And so I think that while it can assist and be a factor of stability in certain areas, like it can bring you back to a more stable place in terms of potentially mood or depression or low level depression or anxiety. It can also not be helpful depending on what you're dealing with. So I think that like obsessive compulsive disorder is another one that comes to mind, where like movement might be problematic. It might be part of a compulsion that is contributing to, you know, a mental health struggle. So it's not that simple.
I appreciate you bringing that up. And it kind of goes back to that wellness wheel, doesn't it? Kind of this idea of balance and seeing what's contributing to certain needs that are not being met and what's helping meeting those needs too. So I appreciate, it sounds like, you know, like everything, it's individual, right? What's working for you and what's not working for you. I'd also like to talk a little bit about yoga, because you both do yoga, you both teach yoga, which is very cool. So I know it's it's a lot of definitions that are kind of big to define, but I'd like to ask if you could give, you know, a definition of yoga, and you can also, if you'd like, if it's easier, to kind of talk about what maybe the stigmas or misconceptions surrounding yoga instead. Either one works.
The first thing I thought of was, I think the meaning of yoga, I think it's union, right, Ella? Is it union or unity?
There's so many different
Probably so many. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the two I thought of immediately was that. So like it's not just movement. I think it's adding, it's paying attention on purpose and awareness. And that can be just breath work. And then there's movement and community. It's not about doing this by yourself in isolation. It's coming together with others. Yeah, it's community and being together with people.
I actually love that you said union, Jordan, because one of my favorite definitions of yoga is yoke, not like the middle of your egg, but YOKE, like Oregon Trail. Did you play Oregon Trail when you were a kid? And you're like axle broke on your wagon, and you, I don't know, anyways. So it's like yoke means like to harness up and channel the energy towards. So I think that yoke is something you use with an ox on a wagon.
That sounds vaguely familiar.
But with yoga, like what Jordan was saying with union, it is to gather up your mind, your body, your breath, and channel it all in one direction. So it's to make you a powerful person. Yeah, by bringing it all together. Sometimes our energy is pulled one way and then our brain is pulled the other way, and then our body is at work, but our mind is not there. And so yoga is the practice. It's a physical, spiritual plus practice of channeling your energy.
I love that you broke it down to the individual level. Like, we're channeling all of this intentionally, individually. And then when you do a practice with others, like, you're doing it all together. So I think about, we talk about vibrations or frequency or energy or just attention and like good intentions. So if we're all doing that together, that just creates a really great space, a really great community, and inspiration for others.
I love this. I love you got me thinking about the word yoke, because the only other time that I've actually run into yoke is in creating garments, and it's used to kind of support other parts. I was actually Googling it while you were chatting.
Yeah.
Like, what exactly is the yoke? It's like right here on the shoulders usually, or near the neck. And it's supposed to support looser parts of the garments. I don't know if that has any relation to it, but
I want to acknowledge that referencing the Oregon Trail might have been an inappropriate and insensitive reference, genuinely. So I was thinking about that ever since I said it. I was like, ooh, that is probably not the greatest. So if there's a reworking of the definition or the conversation about yoke, please let me know. I'm happy to extract the reference to Indigenous genocide.
that is a really good point, Ella, and thank you for acknowledging that. Kind of shifting gears here. What are some stigmas or misconceptions surrounding yoga that you'd like to address, or anything that you'd like to kind of break down as far as like a myth busting kind of section here?
The first thing I think of is social media, which I think I talked about on the first episode I was on, is that yoga, you have to look a certain way, have a certain body type, wear certain type of clothes, and then you have to like contort yourself into these wild poses that maybe are unrealistic and possibly unsafe.
Same. Yeah. I think marketing has really, well, and yoga is an ancient Indian practice, and it's been whitewashed as well. And that is damaging to what it sort of dilutes what it really is. And so I struggle with the making it accessible to everyone, and also honoring that it's a spiritual practice and that's how it started. And the reason that yoga was done was so that monks could meditate longer and be comfortable in a seat for hours. So really the movement, like we we're talking about with balance, with everything, the movement was for the purpose of being still. And meditation was the real reason to move and stretch. And so to see the way that, it's been sort of monetized and profit driven. And, I think when I think about the Instagram, if you just searched hashtag yoga, you can't really capture it in a picture. That's part of the struggle. You're capturing a pose, which the yoga is actually the stuff in between the pose. it's the getting into the pose, it's the falling out of the pose and trying to go back into the pose. It's everything in between, and the pose and the achievement is like not really the point. So the picture is just such a thin slice of what it actually represents. And but you can't market the I mean, I guess you could. Maybe we should try that, Jordan. Let's make a shift, because real yoga really is like you're in a balancing posture. Your leg is shaking, you're wobbling, you're falling out of it 5 times, and you're choosing to recommit, to get back into it, to breathe, to think about the floor and your foot and your bones. And yeah, that's not beautiful to market, apparently. So
kind of reminds me of like at the end of a marathon, right? There's the medal, but we're kind of missing the actual running,
the 26.2 miles. What?
Yeah.
It's like, that's the achievement. Yeah.
Totally. It makes me think about kind of what we were talking about earlier with judgment, and the word I'm hearing is like perfection. And like the not good enough, like the process, the wobbling, that run wasn't good enough to be captured to talk about like, this is the process, like that medal needs to be the picture, or that one slice, that one pose is the picture of perfection that we're going to show to people, when really it is the wobbling. Like those are the classes that I appreciate the most, when the teacher talks about how wobbling is yoga and imperfection is yoga and being human. And when you're doing it perfectly, when you're standing super, super still in a balancing pose, like you're not doing yoga anymore. I don't even know what that is. I was going to say being perfect, but being perfect is an unachievable thing.
I really appreciate you saying that. I've been in a couple of yoga classes where I feel that, and it's an internal pressure. That wasn't the teacher, but it was like, oh, I'm not doing the tree pose right. I'm falling over. I might as well just not be here. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Like not doing it right. I'm using quotes, not doing it right. That's where we get in our own way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And is there a link between yoga and mental health? And if so, what are those benefits?
I would have to speak kind of from personal experience with this, but I'm sure that there's research. I hope that there's research. My experience was, I mean, really, yoga is what got me through not just my master's program, but specifically the internship period of my master's program. You can, in theory, prepare to be seeing clients every day. And then when you actually are doing it, nothing in our master's could really prepare us for that. So the practice of doing yoga is what allowed me to continue showing up for my internship, continue going to class. And people often will ask me, when I tell them that I'm a mental health counselor, like, well, how do you not take all of that home with you? And really the answer is yoga. The answer is that I have a practice that is mental, it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's physical, and it allows me to remove myself from work and from my clients' experiences and their stories and their trauma and their sadness and also their joy, because that's theirs and I want them to keep that too. And all of those experiences belong to them. So it allows me to untangle myself, because our instinct and probably the reason a lot of us go into to become counselors is because we so easily feel connected. So what I had to learn was to disconnect in a healthy way, and yoga has that way of like, you are in it, but you're also observing it, you're watching it. And it's maybe more meditation than yoga, but yoga is a moving meditation. So I'm not as good at the sitting still meditations, but the moving meditation that comes from doing yoga is really, that got me through.
Yeah, I was thinking about this question, and I think I can also really just speak for myself and how it connects for me. And yoga is one of my ways of moving through like emotions and what I've experienced from working with clients, and also with my personal stuff. And then with the pandemic, that's also created a shift, because before it was, let me leave work and go to the studio. So that's where the community, that union piece came in. That let me connect with another human being who is like a friend, a peer, a teacher. And then we'll have like some conversation, take class, flow together, breathe together. So I'm moving through, it's hot, it's sweaty because we're doing hot power yoga. It's hot and it's sweaty. And I'm moving through and detoxing through stuff that's really hard to work through on my own. And then afterwards, we talk about how great class is and we go home. That was pre-pandemic, and a little bit now as things are opening up. And then especially in the worst parts of the pandemic, it was connecting on Zoom and doing class on Zoom. And that was hard. And also, I don't know if I would have made it without it. I mean, we connected in the best ways we could with like chatting through Zoom on the chat to the teacher, like saying hi, and us maybe like waving to each other. And then again, moving through the emotions I'm feeling instead of letting it get stuck in my body somewhere, moving through it so I can expel it. And kind of like what Ella said, like reconnecting with myself. So getting like reintegrated with who I am and not internalizing something from work, like with a client, or even from an uncomfortable situation with a friend or a peer or a stranger. It's just such a great way to move through things. And it doesn't have to be the only way people move through stuff. I think it's just it's especially us, it's our personal preference to move through. Plus it is that spiritual element of, for me specifically, connecting with other people, reconnecting with my body.
Thank you both for sharing your experiences with that. Ella, did you have something?
Yeah, I also just wanted to add and to acknowledge that there are some spaces where yoga is available and the spaces are toxic. So like I'm glad, Emily, that you were in a class where your teacher was embracing your wobbly tree and the judgment was coming from you, and that is a great place to work. But there are yoga spaces where the judgment is coming from the teacher or the judgment is coming from the space. And so I encourage clients that I'm working with or potential clients, and I encourage friends, like when you're looking for a therapist, you shop. You do not have to decide that the first therapist that you meet for an hour session is your therapist. Same thing goes with your yoga or your movement community. If you try out a run club and you realize like, wow, this is super weird feeling, or it doesn't feel right to me, or you go to a yoga studio and they give you an assist or a cue that doesn't seem right, doesn't sit right, like keep going. Whenever I encourage, if I ever encourage clients to go to a 12-step group, I tell them to shop. Look for the one that feels right for you. It may not be the first 5 that you go to, but my hope is that there will be one that does feel right. But I do want to acknowledge that just like those myths are, come from a place, and some people and some yoga studios and spaces and teachers subscribe to those myths and teach from that place. And that may not be a helpful place for a lot of people.
I absolutely appreciate that. I want to uplift that. I think that a lot of times when we work with people, or just talk with friends and, they might be struggling. We say like, oh, maybe you should talk to a therapist. And then we think like, that's the end. And it's like, okay, it's done. But it's a journey to find the right person in that moment too. And yoga, it makes sense that it would be no different in that. And I like that the way that you described it, saying like, this doesn't sit right with me, doesn't feel comfortable to me. Because that's really what it is. It's what works for you, right? And it depends. You talked a little bit about with your clients when you talk about yoga. And so do you bring yoga into your mental health practice and vice versa?
I definitely do. I normally don't call it yoga, depending on my client, or I usually use postures too, like the poses. So like the extended mountain that I described earlier with the client in the elementary school. I do also talk about putting your legs up the wall, which is a restorative pose. And it also, if you're triggered by something, if you're flight, fight, freeze response is on, putting your feet up the wall sends your blood back into your belly, into your heart, into your brain, where the fight, flight, freeze response sends your blood into your hands and feet so that you can fight or run. So I do teach clients, like, if you feel anxious, putting your feet up the wall, if you feel low energy and you need to boost your energy, stand in mountain pose. So I definitely, and the breathing portion of yoga, I absolutely use that probably with like every single client. And I start out just by teaching like 3-part breath, which is to breathe in for part 1, to hold your breath at the top of the inhale for part 2, and to exhale for part 3. And I encourage, 3 or 5 breaths like that. And that sort of resets your physiological system, your central nervous system. It's sort of like rebooting your computer. Is just taking 3 or 4 or 5 big intentional breaths where you hold it at the top.
And for me, I focus more on the breath work. Those are like the coping skills that I share with my clients. And I do a lot of different other coping skills like visualizing, other stuff like that. But I start with breathing. Similar reason that Ella does it is because it's a reset. It sends a signal to your brain that like you're not being threatened, that you are in a safe space. Because when you're in a safe space, you're taking deeper breaths. So you kind of have to trick yourself. So if you're triggered or you're entering an anxiety inducing situation, and the facts, like like you're actually not in a threatening situation, like you're not about to die, because that's what the fight, flight, freeze is really for. When you're in situations where your brain is like, especially that animalistic kind of older part of the brain is like, oh my God, like this feels weird, we might die here. When really, like, typically the average human is not in a situation where they're going to die. They're feeling uncomfortable, they're feeling anxious, or they were triggered. And maybe the original trauma was life-threatening or scary, and this was a trigger. It's not the original situation. So let's remind ourselves with breathing that we're safe. So you're using your body to create like your safe space in your home, in your body. And it's like the reset of the computer. Like, let me do the deep breathing so I can feel calmer and then do something different.
I love that. I love that reset kind of way of describing it. And then also, always bringing it back to the present is always really helpful, especially when we talk about survivors of trauma, right? You were talking about going through the fight, flight, or freeze. I've heard of fawn too, but essentially kind of feeling like you're under attack and then kind of bringing it back to the safe space. We talked a lot about kind of movement techniques and activities. Then you were talking about like breathing and things like that you recommend to your clients. So I'd like to kind of move forward and ask, you also mentioned anxiety. So do you find with your clients that there might be a sense of anxiety when talking about movement and wellness? So for example, we were talking a lot about pressures from society, and is there any kind of sense of shame that we may feel when it pertains to like things like lack of movement or weight loss and those kinds of pressures as well? And could movement possibly be a difficult topic for some individuals?
For sure, 1,000%. I just tried a new yoga studio yesterday, and as a yoga instructor myself, I felt apprehensive about going. I was like, I don't know what the vibe is going to be like here. I don't know what the students are going to be like. I don't know anything about this place, but I think there are definitely barriers to entry when you think of like joining a group fitness. And I love that Jordan's talked so much about like the other humans being there, and that being such an important piece of the practice of movement, is that you are doing it with someone. And that can also cause a lot of anxiety, that can cause a lot of feelings of insecurity. So I think that while it's got benefits, it also has risks, and the risks are serious. And just like, participating in therapy can have rewards, it can also be painful. and it can be uncomfortable, and showing up is definitely the hardest part. And like we were saying before, sometimes finding the right person or finding the right studio can be the hardest part too. So there are definitely challenges in getting connected and taking the first step. And yeah.
I was thinking about different elements of your question because I was also thinking about anxiety. And my first thought was anxiousness with breathing exercises, which is slightly different. So some people feel anxious about changing their breath or like doing it right. And some breathing exercises, like Ella said, requires holding it. So some people might feel anxious about holding their breath, especially when they're dealing with anxiety issues and panic, like, oh my God, I can't breathe. So I thought about that. And then I started thinking about access and like having all the right stuff, like the right I'm using quotes, like the right conditions to enter a group exercise, whether it's a gym or a studio. Like I have to have the right clothes, or I have to have the quote unquote right body to go.
That's such a good point. And I think it kind of, and we'll be talking more about this later as well, like the monetization of movement and how capitalistic kind of cultures have maybe influenced our perception of what is valid movement and what isn't. I also wanted to lean in, could movement possibly be a difficult topic for a survivor of trauma specifically?
Yes, definitely. And I think it depends. It's like we were talking about before, it depends on the individual and the trauma, especially if the trauma does involve your body. There could be a lot of scary things, and maybe even unexpected things could come up, like with yoga, like shavasana, for example. So that's the final rest at the end. So the teacher says shavasana, you're kind of like lying out, like on like kind of like an X on your mat on your back. And part of you is like, oh my gosh, yes, I did all that work to get here. Now I can just relax and like feel the efforts of my work. But then the rest of you might start to freak out because you're in such a vulnerable position that way. So then that kind of leaves you open for triggers to come up and for triggers to happen.
And what is shavasana? Is there a, like, what language is it from and what is the meaning behind it? Do you know?
Yeah, so it's Sanskrit. And does it translate to corpse pose?
I think like it's got multiple translations too. So I think corpse pose is sometimes the like language that places might use to cue shavasana. I think it translates to deep rest, but it probably has like 17 different interpretations.
Yeah, like I just thought final rest, deep rest.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll even tell my students, like, go to your shavasana, go to your deep
Mm-hmm.
rest. So maybe that is like up the wall. Maybe it's reclining butterfly. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's taking an easy seat. It doesn't necessarily mean lying flat on your back.
I love that definition. And I know that with things like language, it can get kind of murky as far as like there's certain words that you don't have in in
Mm-hmm.
this language, so we can't perfectly define it, but I can kind of see kind of the gist of it. Is it more or less helpful, because we were talking about like the communal aspect of movement, is it more or less helpful for individuals maybe feeling anxious or nervous about exploring movement to do so with a buddy or a group? And I ask this because I often hear about this like concept of an accountability buddy when it comes to like things like working out. Is this concept in and of itself kind of damaging, or is it helpful for some people?
I feel like it depends on your buddy. And I think that it would probably be really helpful to do like an informed consent with your buddy. Like, what is the nature of this relationship? And how are we going to navigate it if somebody doesn't want to do the agreed upon activity on the time and day we agreed upon? And when, like, when will this relationship end and how will this relationship end? So, just like how the therapeutic relationship, you define the terms and you like touch the outlines of this is how we are going to navigate this. And these are our policies. And that might sound really weird to do with a friend that you want to engage in movement with, or you want to support you in your movement journey. But I think that, getting weird can be really helpful often. So I think that like literally laying it out and because also knowing this is what I need from you, and being able to articulate to the friend that wants to support you or that you want to support, what is it that you need from me? Do you need me to like push you, or do you need me to be supportive of what you are choosing? Because I think that it could be damaging or it could be really helpful. It just depends on who is the buddy and what have you and the buddy determined is the nature of the relationship.
I 100% agree, because really what you're laying out are boundaries, and you're expressing your needs to the other person of how I want to be supported. Because I think where the toxicity comes in is where people are using shame from a place of I want to help or motivate you. Like, hey, like I don't even want to give an example because it's so unkind.
Cringy.
Yeah, cringy. Yeah, like I stopped myself. So I was like, I don't actually want to say it. I don't even want to come up with an example. It's just not fun. And so coming from that place, I think is where it can be damaging and unhelpful. So like Ella said, like kind of outlining terms and boundaries of if you don't hear from me, like call me. Or if you're not hearing from me, that means I really need a break. Or let's agree upon a day and time and let's go. Especially those who are struggling with lack of motivation or with depression. Maybe they can find an accountability buddy who can help drive them to the park, or if they're going to the gym, if they feel safe. But sticking to outlining terms, I think that's a great idea.
I love it. I love all of these tips and things like that. I love this. How would you go about having a conversation with a client about the benefits of movement who might be nervous or anxious about the topic due to the culture that we live in? So maybe it's a client who's really focused on the body or things like that, or are feeling the shame of talking about movement in general because maybe they feel like they don't have enough movement in their daily routine, things like that. So how would you go about having that conversation of that little pie piece on the wellness wheel?
I think I use a similar explanation that I've used here. I'll bring in hormonal boost and how it's really about creating a mood shift. It can help you to work through emotions. I don't talk about like your body or like losing weight or stuff like that. I don't think that's helpful. I just focus on like, can this help you work through something better than how you're doing it now? Or are you craving a movement? That kind of thing.
I usually try to ask what they've enjoyed in the past or what would they be willing to try. So often people fall away from patterns or habits of movement for a variety of reasons. And then, those are usually the most comfortable to re-engage with, to say like, oh, well, I used to walk around this lake that's near my house, or I used to have, I don't know, whatever activity I used to do. And then re-engaging in that probably has the least amount of intimidation. So I try to usually start there, and also to acknowledge like you are already moving. You walked from the lobby into this office, so you're walking, and you want to maybe increase the amount of walking. So, or whatever, whatever they want to do. I really try to empower and let them lead the charge on it, and then like allow them to experience the benefits. And I usually ask like, at the next session, I'll follow up, like, were you able to re-engage? And if not, like what got in the way, and just like sort of to assess, like, is that the right type of movement? Maybe like try something different, in a really accepting, affirming, like, I know it's hard to make changes, any type of changes. So any small incremental movement towards change is important, and it's valid, and it should be acknowledged and built on.
Totally. And I can't remember if you said this explicitly, Ella. I just thought of something about how, like, I don't emphasize what type of movement or like the quote unquote right movement. I just go with what sounds good, or yeah, what have you tried in the past? What do you want to do and incorporate? How can we make it realistic so you can achieve this? And then talk about like what got in the way if something did get in the way.
And I think that really perfectly leads into another question that I had, which is kind of like these misconceptions about movement and mental health. So, we talked a lot about what we might see on social media versus what is actually helpful for people's mental health. Or also, I think there's this idea too that like a workout is only valid if it's at the gym or you burned so many calories or things like that, or just the concept of a good workout, things like that. So any other misconceptions that you want to break down?
Another one I thought of is I have to do it for a certain amount of time. That's what I thought of immediately. Like, no, like, I mean, studies will say that I think a half hour of movement will have some kind of guaranteed mood boost. And maybe you don't have time for a half hour. Maybe you can do 10 minutes every hour or something. I think just any kind of movement. And like Ella said, you're already moving. You walked to get from A to B, you're breathing. So just adding in things that I think can increase joy or give you joy. Just and reminding you that moving your body can be really enjoyable.
This might be a whole rabbit hole, so forgive me. But the thing that I was thinking of with this question is what's on my wrist, and the way that technology and like logging a workout in a heart monitoring type of way can really mess with our relationship to the workout or to the movement. I won't even call it a workout, to the movement. So like I was actually at dinner the other night with a couple of friends, and one of them was saying she like walks her dog, and when she walks her dog, she logs it on her Apple Watch as other, because her heart rate doesn't get into the zone of being labeled by the watch as exercise. And just like, what? That's so wild. So I just think that, you know, technology can be an incredible and super helpful tool in assisting us towards health and connection and knowledge. And it can also be awful in, you know, making us feel isolated and causing unhealthy relationships with our bodies and with movement and with other humans, and, you know, disconnecting and polarizing and isolating. So I think that, you know, like proceed with caution, I guess, in terms of like logging or using an app. I know that that can be some people's accountability buddy. It's like, well, I want to achieve my goal in terms of my tracker that I use, or my Fitness Pal, or my Fitbit, or whatever thing it is that you use. But I think that sometimes that can cause us to go into the place of not listening, overexerting, you know, like, oh man, I really need to rest today. I want to rest, but I also am on this streak, so I want to keep going, and I will, you know. So I think that technology is such an interesting piece of our lives and so many parts of our lives. And now it's so present in our movement too, that it can be, it can get in the way.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I think that there is, again, it kind of goes to like that shame piece of it, or things like that, where it's just like, hey, you had a good workout yesterday. First of all, it labels good. And then, you know, keep it up today, or, you know, things like that. And maybe it kind of goes back to boundaries. Maybe you need boundaries with your technology too. And I know that you can like set goals and things like that, and it's okay to reset them, and it's okay to not get them every day. And then also I think that there's ways to set, like, do you want me to remind you, or things like that. So set boundaries with your technology too. If you're feeling, I think it kind of goes back to like feeling uncomfortable, feeling that pressure, feeling out of balance or whatever. Maybe it's time to kind of come back to your Apple Watch or whatever you use, and have a conversation with it.
Redefine the terms, the nature of the relationship.
Yes, definitely. Jordan, did you have something? It looked like it's okay if you don't. I just wanted to check.
I did, but I felt like you said it all like so well, because I love like redefining the terms. I was thinking that too, and for myself, like when I'm super tired, but I have a watch too, I have a Fitbit, And it's like, hey, that 10-minute mark before the hour, like you got to go get your whatever number of steps. And I'm over here thinking, I'm so tired. I just want to sit. Or, I got it to track steps and help me move a bit more, track my heart rate for my heart health. And then maybe seeing it every day, maybe it's not actually helpful.
Right. Yeah.
And then it can, I think, like take you out of balance with yourself. And then you have to remind yourself, why am I including movement in my life? Why did I get this technology? Let's remember that. And does everything I'm doing, does it align with like myself, my values, and my goals?
I love that. I think that that's an important question to ask. And speaking of, technology and other kind of little things that we add to enhance, or not even enhance, just add to our movement routine, I should say. Like clothes and everything, and classes and all that stuff. So what is the monetization of movement, and why is it so damaging? And also, how does it kind of relate to this already lack of access to mental health resources in general?
Whew. That's such a big question. I think one of the words you said was lack. Like immediately you can be like, oh, I lack these clothes, or I lack this like smartwatch. I'm already like out of the game. I can't do it. And then I have to have like we said before, the right clothes, and for yoga, I have to have the quote unquote right yoga mat and blocks, and I have to use a specific strap. I can't use a towel, like all these limits that society imposes, and then we re-encourage, that just take us out of something that we just wanted to enjoy.
This frustrates me so much because movement is it's yours. You don't need anyone's permission or direction or service to engage in it. Like, it is an intuitive thing that is accessible to everyone, and that wellness has been, shaped the way that it has, and that people have the perception that it's something that you have to take time out to do, that you've got to have certain gear to participate in, gear that's like really ridiculously expensive, just like it's not true. And acting as though it's not true is difficult. Like showing up in a non-traditional yoga attire would probably they might feel uncomfortable. Like, and I can imagine, I actually did a yoga class on Zoom in jeans the other week because I was traveling and I didn't have quote unquote yoga pants, but like whatever pants you're wearing are yoga pants. You can move and do and stretch and breathe in whatever you are wearing, or you don't need a mat either. Like, you have a floor and there's ground, there's grass. You can stick your hands into the grass. You actually probably feel really great to stick your hands and your feet into the grass and down dog and to feel the earth. So you don't need a mat. You don't need a block. You don't need a strap. Maybe you have a belt at your house. That's a strap. Maybe you have a book or a stack of old laundry. That's a bolster. Like, you have everything you need, just in the fact that you are living in your physical body, and that we've bought into, or that we have perpetuated the idea. And like, I include myself in the we, right? Because I show up to teach yoga usually wearing what is expected of me as a yoga teacher. And sometimes I don't show up wearing jeans. It would probably be pretty uncomfortable and kind of hot, but I mean, you don't need to do anything. You don't need to have anything. You've already got it all.
What I was hearing and what you were saying is that like we have to earn the right to be able to do it, when really it's inherent. I was going to say inherent, right? I feel like there's a different word, Ella, if you want to chime in. Like it's part of who we are. It's not something we have to earn or show we deserve or have value to be able to move our bodies.
Yeah, I love what you said, Ella, as far as movement is yours. I love that piece. And I think that it can be extremely empowering. And so, with that, kind of one of my final questions here is, do you find that your clients feel empowered after incorporating more movement into their daily lives? And can this especially be true for survivors of trauma?
The first thing I think of is like my clients when I teach them breath work, and afterwards they feel so much better. And then when they practice it on their own and they were like, I was feeling really panicky, but then I took some deep breaths and then I felt less panicky and more in my body. Like that's empowering. Or with some clients, I've been having them kind of reverse, and I've had them teach me the coping skills I've taught them. Ella gave me the idea actually. And they feel so much more confident because they're able to express in words like the things they're kind of doing on their own and what I've done with them. And I reiterate, like, however I've said it to you is not the only or right way. Like, just say and do and what works for you. And that's great. And they feel more confident. And then what you were talking about with survivors, I think that can be, it's a hard process and it can be so empowering, especially when the trauma involves like harm to their bodies, to be able to reclaim that. It's such a hard process, and it can be so empowering to be able to, when you're not dissociating or disconnecting and you feel in your body again, can be so empowering.
One of the techniques that I've used with trauma survivors is progressive muscle relaxation. And we start in the toes, and you just squeeze your toes and then release your toes. And then you squeeze your toes and your feet, and you flex your feet and then let it go. And I incorporate breath with it too. So I usually encourage like a flexing of the muscles, holding for 10 seconds, but on the 8th or 9th second, taking a big breath in. And as you unflex your muscles, breathing out. And I have definitely like seen in the physical body, like the shift that creates and the feeling that creates. A shorter version of it that I like to do is just with the arms and the chest. So squeezing your hands, your forearms, your biceps, your shoulders, and even your neck and your chest, and just squeezing it in, maybe like in a T shape. And then on your last breath, breathing in and releasing your arms. That can feel like really uplifting and relieving. And we hold tension in our bodies. And often if, we've had physical trauma to the body, we might tense anyways. And so to tense on purpose and use that tension as a tool to let go can be really important shift. My proudest moment as a yoga teacher or as a counselor, a therapist, is when my client doesn't listen to me, but does something else that's actually better for them. So I'm just like, I'm not you. I'm up here making suggestions from the outside. You are living in your life. You are living in your body. You know it so 1,000 times better than I do. So I'm going to throw ideas at you. And it is, I've never been more proud than in a time where the client or the yoga student does not do what I suggest. They do something that's more authentic and more power, like speaking to the empowerment piece. Like that is what actually brings me the most joy.
I love that. I like that you like when students are like, you know what, I'm going to do my own thing. And that makes a lot of sense. It kind of goes back to like, these are just tips, it might not work for everyone. And then kind of making it your own. And again, movement is yours. And, this is your yoga class. How do you want to, go about it? With that, what are some other tips that you have for someone who may want to add more movement or maybe less, depending on how their little slice of the pie is, into their routine. And then if you have any kind of places where they can learn more or research movement activities that will be the right fit for them.
My first thought was honestly breath work and then stretching. I think that's really a personal bias for me though. Like I do that and I want to add that in more with my routine. So I think it's more just what are they looking for? What kind of outcome do they want? Are they feeling a need to decrease depression? Are they feeling anxiety? Is there an emotion they want to work through? Or maybe they're feeling like muscle aches and pains, like maybe kind of like what we were saying, maybe it's too much movement or it's from an accident or trauma and they're feeling aches and pains. So maybe they need to do stretching and breath work instead.
My general suggestion to anyone considering changing their routine with movement, either by adding some in or adding in stillness, would be try it. You don't need anyone's permission. You are whole and complete, and you are capable of doing exactly what it is that you think might help. And try it. Do it. You have my full encouragement. I hope that it is helpful, whatever it is that you choose to do. The yoga studio where Jordan and I went through yoga teacher training offers a community class. It's free. There's a donation request for a food item. They donate collected food items to a local food bank. And that's Warrior One. Their website is We Are Warrior One. And at Community Yoga and Dance too, there's also free donation-based classes available virtually. So you don't need anyone's permission.
I love that. I love that so much. And just wanted to, as a final question, if there's anything else that you'd like to add, maybe say to anyone listening, any kind of final thoughts before we sign off.
I kind of wanted to add to what Ella was saying, and I forgot the exact wording of what I was going to say. I think it was more like, yeah, like I'm not going to give a specific, like, oh, like you must try this. I suggest you try that. It's like Ella said, like you want to do something, like do it, try it, name it. And kind of related to something else Ella said, like, I'm not you, like you are your expert on who you are and what you need. And I would feel uncomfortable telling you what to do because typically what I tell if I were for some reason, it would be based on my own personal bias. So it wouldn't make sense for me to share. So yeah, I empower especially clients to pick something they want. And then we talk about like, okay, what are the barriers? What's realistic? What are you looking for out of this? And then we go from there. Like Ella said, try it.
So I think that that's a wonderful place to kind of end our conversation here. And I want to thank you, Jordan, and you, Ella, so much. And I'd also like to thank the listener for listening to the Victim Service Center podcast. The VSC is a nonprofit organization that provides free confidential counseling services for victims of any kind of trauma in Central Florida. To learn more about our services, please visit victimservicecenter.org. And to everyone listening, healing is not linear and you are not alone. And thank you so, so much, Ella and Jordan, for joining me today.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.